this is such a short thing. I'm only going to touch on a different topic, probably over the next few months when we do this. But I thought I had been doing some work with some guys on oil burner work, and I know a lot of us don't do oil burner stuff, but it's kind of in my blood right now. I used to do oil burner work every time the weather would get cool in in the fall, and here in Virginia Beach, it's been a lot cooler than usual. I go outside at night and I can almost smell the oil burners because of the way I grew up. 50 years in the business, and this time of the year was the time that I would get out there and start working on these things. This is the time of year we start servicing them. So I thought I would just touch on it a little bit. We don't take but a few minutes for this at the beginning of the meeting. So I thought I would just touch on a few things. A couple things might be interest you guys, and also I think I'll cover gas furnaces next month, and maybe the month after that heat pumps, or we'll pick a different topic. But anyway, um, this our company here, the Building Practices and Trade School here in Virginia Beach, we are members of the Air Conditioning Contractors of America, um, primarily because I was in that business for so long. And they've got some pretty good documents and things like that to tell you how the trades, how they should do certain things. So I went in there and pulled up the maintenance things, primarily because when you tell someone to have the unit serviced so that you'll have an idea what they're supposed to be doing is primarily the reason I did this. Um, as I said, I'm just going to talk briefly on oil burners. Hollis, are we looking at the oil burner?
Yeah, that's an oil burner, Kenny.
Okay, thanks. All right. Anyway, again, we don't have a lot of time, so I thought I would just focus on a few things. Again, I know some of the group, they probably never see an oil burner. I know most of us here in in the East Coast and certainly in New England and areas like that, they see them pretty routinely. So um, when you go to service the burner itself, the furnace, we're going to open it up. We're going to open the ports. We're going to vacuum it out. We're going to check the flue pipe. We're going to vacuum it out. We're going to, make sure everything is good and sound, no rust, no water, that kind of stuff. But when you're in the burner itself, the things that ACCA recommends that we do is one, we check the transformer. The transformer is the device that generates the power that actually makes the arc. Without a good strong arc, you you may not get a good light. You may not get a light at all. Sometimes the blower that's actually moving the air down the blast tube, if the arc is weak, will actually blow that arc away, and it won't ignite the oil. So we're recommended that we always go in there and make sure we check that. We pull the nozzle assembly out. Now the nozzle assembly is important because it does have the nozzle where the oil sprays. It atomizes the oil. There's an air blast that's going to come out of there with it. And what you can see here are the two electrodes. The electrodes are receiving electricity from the transformer or the igniter. And this is a pretty good drawing here. It's showing the actual gap. We basically create a gap, nice points on the electrodes there. We make sure that that's good, kind of straight up from where the outlet is on the nozzle assembly. It looks like about 1/8 of an inch gap. When it is working properly, you will have a decent arc there, a good strong arc, and that atomized oil will ignite when it takes off. And once it's ignited, some of the systems actually shut the arc off. Some of the systems do not. Some of the older systems would turn it off or whatever. And that's once it's ignited, and you don't have to worry about it until it comes back.
Kenny,
Yes,
they used to be like 10,000 volts or something crazy.
some are 10,000, some are 17,000 now.
Yeah.
I know about the 10,000 one because I actually squatted down one time with the transformer pulled back, and I put my elbow on it, and it lit me up, buddy. I'm gonna tell you, I knew I had been had when that thing hit me. But it's funny how if I back up here, if you look at this little illustration I have here, this is kind of a very crude way to check a transformer. There are testers and things that we put on there, but a lot of the older guys would actually just strike a screwdriver across there, kind of tell that the arc, it's pretty good, it's pretty strong, it's usually blue. If it's a weak transformer, you'll know it, and typically you're going to want to go ahead and change that thing out real quick because it'll probably get weaker. If even if it ignites at all, it'll get weaker, and you're going to be back there in the middle of the night working on this thing. So that's real important. The nozzle assembly, the electrodes that you see there, it's important because as they arc, that arc jumps back between those two things. You're having air go down the blast tube of this burner. It'll hit the arc, and I've actually seen it. I have some of these things set up on stands so we can demonstrate things, and I've actually seen the arc blow away. It just too much air, it'll take it out of there. So if it's not a strong arc, you typically will get oil, won't ignite. The furnace will run a little bit, it'll pump some oil. And eventually, when you do get an ignition, you're going to rumble for this. Now, I always tell my students here in the class to understand that the oil on these systems is much more forgiving if you get a blast of oil down there when it ignites than if you had natural gas or propane pumping out of something like this. It's not very forgiving. It's probably going to take the doors off of it. But oil, you can actually cycle it, and it can be pumping in there for a little bit. And then later on, when you finally do get it to ignite and it burns that up, it's usually it's probably going to rumble. It's rare that I've ever seen one actually, get so bad it wants to take the doors off of a burner. So when you hit a reset button, it may not ignite, but it still may be pumping. It still may be pumping oil, and eventually, when it does ignite, unlike natural gas, you run natural gas for a little bit and then ignite it again. You're going to know it because it's going to probably take the door off of the thing. But anyway, this is real critical though. You want good points. You want the gap set properly. You want it positioned so that it hits that atomized oil. That arc will hit that atomized oil when it fires. Here is a nozzle. There are many types of nozzles. They are actually drilled so that under pressure, we're generally talking 100 pounds of pressure, the oil will spray through that little opening. You see that little opening in the end there, and it would pump a certain amount, like a 0.75. We know it's going to pump 75. 0.75 is going to be 3/4 of a gallon of oil if it ran for an hour. So they're all drilled differently depending on the size of the furnace. You can see some pretty big ones. Usually today we're talking about commercial stuff if it gets really big. But if you look at the left end of this, that is a strainer that will easily get clogged, and the nozzle opening at the opposite end, the orifice, will actually get clogged up. They never recommend you trying to clean one of these. You just toss them. We have a little tool that we can put on there, pop it off the end of that nozzle assembly, and put a new one in, and that's really the way to do it. In most cases, you're going to want to go back with whatever it was on this thing. So the guy that's in there working on it, if he pops a 0.75 out of this thing, he's going to want to put a 0.75 in there, as well as the gallons, the amount of oil that pumps through. This thing also directs the angle of the flame. So if you've got a firebox shaped one way and you got a firebox shaped a different way, you're probably going to have a different pattern. Sometimes it'll pump a pattern. The oil will atomize in a pattern that'll make like a hollow flame in the center. So all this stuff is critical. This needs to be, addressed when they do the servicing. Before you actually get to the nozzle, you're going to be looking for an oil filter. So if you tell somebody get it serviced, there's an oil filter in the line somewhere. They need to open that thing up, get that filter out of there. It's a cartridge type. This one here is pretty common, but there's a lot of filters, a lot of different ones. If you open it up and it's just really filthy and so forth, then you can usually count on the strainer that's actually in the fuel pump. Here's two different types of strainers here. One's for a 2-stage pump, one's for a single-stage pump. They get clogged up as well. The gaskets typically will need to be replaced on the pump once you change all that. Now, I'm going to tell you something that I've noticed in the many years that I've worked on these things. Sometimes you'll open them up, you're looking at a dirty filter, you're looking at a dirty strainer, and you're looking at a dirty nozzle. There are guys that will come out here and change all that and then just drop all these components next to the furnace, especially if it's located in some remote place. Like I've worked on furnaces in crawl spaces before, things like that. If you see these piled up as a home inspector, you see these piled up next to a furnace somewhere, maybe in the furnace room itself, with all this goo and grime and stuff on there, it's a very good indication that they've got dirty oil. In other words, the oil tank is probably dirty. It may be pulling off the bottom of the tank, and all that sludge and stuff is getting pumped up, picked up in the system. This happens a lot when people run out of oil. If you run out of oil, the pump is, in other words, it's going to pump all the way down to the lowest point where it can remove oil from the tank, and that's what it's going to pick up. It's going to pick that up. Whereas if you got oil in there, it kind of dilutes it out, and it's not quite as bad. But another thing that'll do this is if you're on that automatic service and they come and put oil in the tank, they'll stick something in the tank. The extension on the handle itself. They put it down in the tank and they start pumping the oil. Sometimes they stir that grime up in the bottom of the tank. And if the oil burner fires while this is going on, you'll get the same thing here. What I recommend and what I've always done is if I would see this, and if the service guy's dumb enough to leave all this stuff laying out there, I make sure my client knows that there's evidence that they've got a dirty oil tank, and then they might want to go further with testing it. In some cases, we'll put water finding paste on the end of a stick, and we'll put it down into the tank, and we'll see if we got any moisture in there, any water in there at all. A lot of times when you do that, you'll pick up some goo and things like that. Occasionally, we can even lift the oil line up a little bit to keep from picking that up. But I just want to point out, it's the HVAC guy sometimes that he either forgets or he's just, not maybe not one of your better guys out here doing the service work, and he just leaves this evidence behind. Point this out to the people, because just about every time they run out of oil, they're going to end up having to have somebody come out and go through the fuel system, clean all this stuff out, replace all these components, just to get the oil burner back on.
Hey, Kenny,
And say again.
it might be worth it to mention that the oil should come out the high end of the tank, not the low end.
Right. Well, here's the situation that you run into a lot of times on an underground tank. It gets underground. Sometimes it can shift around. But another problem I've seen so many times is you'll get a young guy, he'll come in there and he'll put the oil lines in through the duplex fitting into it, and he doesn't realize that he's hit the bottom, and he brings it back up some and tightens it up. Sometimes it'll actually go off to one side or the other, and you're not exactly sure where that oil line leads. But over the years, as this stuff accumulates in there, you will definitely start finding this. Now, if you have an above the ground tank, we see above the ground tanks in Hampton Roads primarily as a replacement tank. They'll have an underground tank, they'll go to replace it, they'll find out it's very expensive, so they'll just put a 275 gallon above the ground tank. The underground tank will be abandoned, hopefully properly. It'll be abandoned, and they'll put a tank, next to the house. And if you can lean the tank, situate the tank so that the sludge and stuff can run to one end, it's always better, to make sure that happens. One of the things that I've always found that happens on stuff like this is never fails as an emergency type situation. You're there on the coldest day of the year, maybe even had some snow and some rain and stuff, and you're trying to get these people back up and running because they're freezing, and you're trying to do things, and you probably are not putting in as much time and effort as you really should do on these things. Now, there's a lot of things that you do to any forced hot air furnace when you're servicing it. Oil burners, you've got to vacuum them just about every year. It's very rare that you'll find one that doesn't need some kind of vacuuming. I have seen some gas furnaces that they just barely got dirt. Every year you come in there and you just barely had some issues to deal with. But in my experience, oil burners tend to always need to, be able to be vacuumed out. I don't know of too many of us that are out there checking for heat exchangers and stuff like that. But if a service guy goes out and services and he does a combustion analysis test like that and a few things on it, he can tell if there's some major issues with it. But there's far more to test than just what I've talked about here. I mean, we're talking about the duct system as part of the inspection. Make sure the filter is good so you don't end up burning out a heat exchanger. You A good test to run on these, we all probably run a temperature drop test, a delta test on an air conditioning system. We're looking for that 15 to 20 degree temperature drop. But I talk to a lot of home inspectors, and they don't test the oil burner or a gas furnace for the temperature rise. And it's right in the specs to be done. And when the system is first, comes online, it is a good thing to do, and it is a good thing to do each year. You can learn a lot about the equipment, how it's holding up. You can learn if your fan speed's correct. You can learn if you got a restricted duct. You can learn if the air filter's dirty. You can learn a lot of times if a duct, like on the return, has come apart or something like that. By doing a test where you're taking your intake air and then taking a reading on your outlet air, testing it, and then looking at the unit, looking at the furnace itself, it'll tell you what the temperature rise should be. And it'll vary from equipment to equipment, but a 40 degrees to maybe 70 degrees temperature rise is pretty common on some of them. But you can look at that, and if you got a really high temperature rise, a lot of times you'll find that you've got some kind of restriction, either an undersized return, or maybe you've got a dirty filter. The blower wheel could be real dirty. A lot of times people don't really address that. So there's things that will tell you that it's not moving enough air. And if it's moving too much air, or you think it might be moving too much air, and you get to testing it, sometimes your temperature rise is not as great as you want. I've actually crawled under a house before and found a duct that was disconnected under the house. Maybe the tape joint wasn't good, whatever, and they were pulling in some cool air around the joint. And it was, it's certainly not going to be efficient if you're trying to heat air under the house at the same time you're trying to heat, the air in the house.
Hey,
So
Kenny,
there's a lot
Kenny,
more
hey,
to do.
Kenny. We're running out of time, but we got a question real quick.
Okay.
How do you clean a dirty tank?
It's very difficult. In many cases, I mean, you can try to flush it out some, but in most cases, if you've got an above the ground tank, you can flush it. You flush it to one end of the tank, you can pull a plug out and you can wash it out. If it's an underground tank, super difficult. What we tend to do is raise the oil line higher off of the bottom. So you can actually tell how far the oil line goes down in the tank. When you run out of oil, the easiest way to tell how far the line goes down is just by stabbing the tank. Put a stick in there basically, and just see how far the oil goes down. Sometimes you'll find it's only like an inch or so off of the bottom, and that's easy to raise up, easier. I mean, you still got to dig up the line and raise it. But a lot of times that's what we do in lieu of trying to flush it out, because it can be difficult, to do that. And I don't know about every area of the country, but I do know in our area, because we're right on the Chesapeake Bay, they are real picky about underground oil tanks being abandoned. And if you don't follow the proper procedures and stuff, you might want to shove one on the ground above it, above the ground next to the furnace room, or the boiler room or something like that. But they're really, really picky about how you abandon that tank. There's certain procedures. Every area probably follows different procedures, but we have a company in this area that makes their living just abandoning tanks. And there are funds available to help with that, because they don't want people to not abandon a tank properly just because of the money. They want to make sure it gets taken care of if it does need to be abandoned. If you get water in the tank, if you stab the tank and you find water in the tank, typically you're not going to be worried about getting the water out. You're going to be, you might pump it down one time, but you're going to be trying to get that tank replaced quickly, because that water's coming in there from somewhere, and you don't want that.
So Kenny, let's wrap it up here. We got another speaker coming on.
Okay, well, anyway, I just wanted to bring it up, a few things like this. Like I said, I'm walking around outside and I'm smelling that air, and I'm thinking about it, of all those years that I did that. Next month, Hollis, if you want, we'll continue this. We'll talk maybe about gas furnaces. We'll do heat pumps and a couple of things like that.
Cool.
All right,
Yeah, I
guys,
think that's helpful.
I appreciate the time.